Conscious Creative from MuseWorks Audio. The Conscious Creative is a podcast featuring interviews with artists who are doing transformational work in their craft and in their communities. Join us as we discuss different artistic philosophies, give you brand new tools to bring back to your creative spaces, and build a community of artists dedicated to deepening their relationship with their craft. I'm your host, Mike Irish. Thank you for joining us. Today on The Conscious Creative, we have Jakub Evolved. Jakub Evolved is a hip-hop artist from Vancouver who's been in the hip-hop scene in Vancouver for a few years now. He worked with a group named Kids and then Holy Sock Gang more recently. And Jakub has always used symbolism and Jungian shadow work in his writing and in his ideas in how he creates. So we talked about that in this conversation. We talked about symbolism, what it means to do Jungian shadow work. Any further ado, let's get into the show with Jakub Evolved. Welcome to The Conscious Creative, Jakub Evolved. I'm super stoked, man. We've known each other for a while now, but we've never gotten to talk about this. And I've known that you do shadow work in your music, but I've never talked to you about it, and I'm stoked to hear more about that and what it means to you. So I think to kick things off, I'd really like for you to describe what shadow work means to you and how you would define it, and how you became to practice it in your art.
Okay, yeah, that's such a great question, and thanks again for having me. Yeah, it's my answer might be a little long-winded. There's segments to it, but so it's an abstract thing, right? Shadow work, and from what I've encountered, there's two things I could throw out. Like in a lot of schools of thought, people think shadow work is working with like the negative aspects of yourself, and from a Jungian perspective, and you'll probably hear me say this lots because I'm really big into Carl Jung, and that's where I get a lot of my psychological insight from, or at least I just resonate with what he says, so I've really went down that path with him. And the Jungian take on it isn't, it's not just the negative side of things, it's the entirety of the unconscious mind, right? So we have our conscious mind that we use daily to do all the menial things that we hear in our head all the time. But our consciousness, there's such a larger aspect to it. And our mind is absorbing so much more than we're aware of all the time, from an emotional perspective and just from an observational perspective. So there's so much more being happening in us than we're aware of in our conscious mind, which is the tip of the iceberg above the water, you know what I mean? So from a Jungian perspective, doing shadow work, it's not just the negative stuff, it's all of that unconscious, right? So Jung has this thing he calls individuation, and as far as my understanding goes, it's really limited because it seems like an abstract thing, and I don't know if there's someone out there who can really break it down and say exactly if he's defining a process step by step. But I think for Jung, he did he painted mandalas and stuff, and he created visual works like that. And for him, that was part of what he called his individuation. And it was this process of just through creating, attempting to integrate these, just these energies happening within us from a deeper space, right? So when I work with shadow work per se, what I'm attempting to do is you have faith that this unconscious has a far greater understanding of what's happening even in yourself than the conscious mind, right? So in creating, what I do is like I believe creation is the state of creation is more of a state of like letting go, right? So when I'm really in the thick of things creating, uh, I'm not consumed consciously thinking about what I'm creating. Uh, Only to the point of like, when you're writing rhymes or um, to me, it almost, once you're in the state of creating it, it's almost like a puzzle in terms of syllables and ideas, and you're just kind of finding the right uh, syllable slash visual to put it all together. So there's a bit of a conscious process happening, but in terms of the content, what's actually coming out, you know, um, like the meat of the song and like what it's about, that's kind of like a letting go thing of like just letting it come out and be made. Because like I said, you just um the unconscious just has that much more, right? There's um so and then in working with it, I kind of look at it two ways. One is like when I do consciously take part in like co-creating, uh, it's all done in a, with a sort of like premeditation in terms of taking ideas uh, conceptually as well as maybe technically in terms of how you want to rap and like the technicalities of rapping or the technicalities of whatever format you're working in, as well as the content you want to use with that, right? Um, so if there's something I really want to do consciously, then I'm kind of like I'm attempting to plant seeds, right? I'm planting seeds. Like I take this idea in and I tell myself these are the sort of things I'd like to do with this idea. Uh, but then again, you plant those seeds so that when you're creating, you can again just let go and not think about it, right? And you have that like you're just hoping those seeds you planted come through, and usually they do, and sometimes it takes time, for myself, and maybe not all the maybe they don't always come up. Not every single thing that you try to consciously plant in there comes back up. You know what I mean? And often they'll come up, but maybe in ways you didn't expect. Uh, so it's always like a preemptive thing of like planting ideas, not so much trying to force and steer those ideas into the works while I'm actually creating, right? And then the other side of it would be not really planting any ideas and just kind of talking to yourself, like what's in there, like what's got to come up, you know what I mean? What's happening, like talk to me. You're talking to yourself saying talk to me. I don't know. uh, and you can, yeah, the from from what I've come across in my experience, the best thing you can always do is just write, even in terms of like journaling, not necessarily always trying to writing to create something, but writing to just take time to kind of reflect. And um, writing, like when journaling, again, not consciously, just kind of like you push the pen, keep it moving and like let whatever comes up come up. And it's just like a way of kind of trying to keep that channel open and a conversation happening with the unconscious, right? Um, Yeah, but for me, that's I view things like that, and largely in part to Young as well as other people I've uh, taken interest in over the years. You know what I mean? But Young was huge because of his emphasis on the unconscious mind, particularly for me. And there might be other people out there who have that as well, but from what I've come across, right? His whole emphasis on the unconscious for me was very uh, interesting because to some extent I resonated with it from my own experience already. Like at an early age, I remember writing stuff when I get into writing, and I reflect on it. You go through old writings, maybe half a year later, a year later, and then you read some stuff, and you're like, how did I even write that? Like, I don't even know what I'm talking about, even though
Yeah.
it sounds like I do from what I wrote. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
so from a young age, you kind of have these experiences where like there is like a deeper processing in me
Yeah.
than this day to day like monkey mind up here that like necessarily does, right? Like um so yeah, for me that's how I kind of try to approach things, right? And when you go through things specifically, like it can be really, this is where art can really be healing for people, right? Because when you go through things that it's so like it can shake you deep sometimes, experiences, right? And it's hard to process and go through it, and uh processing it and getting it out artistically through whatever a person's means is. And it doesn't have to be art for anybody, you know what I mean? But like this is where art gets healing, because you're allowing that channel for that, excuse me, to that wound or whatever it is to express itself and
Yeah.
hopefully do a little bit of healing. Yeah, like
And would you consider sort of like that healing? I feel like from what I understand of individuation, that's almost what that healing would be like taking those parts that are hurting and have
mm-hmm,
maybe been repressed, and then like bringing it back into the whole of your consciousness. Would that
mm-hmm.
be sort of the process of individuation, would you say?
I would say so. Again, I'm just a guy who's looked into this stuff in my own time, so I don't know what the academics would say, but that would be my interpretation for sure. That's what it sounds like is happening, right? Yeah, it's uh, through kind of creating and opening these channels and working with them, you're integrating, right? Reintegrating, and yeah, or at least that would be the hope and the aim. And uh, it's probably not some like magical thing that just like totally erases everything and makes your life just like super simple and golden, but it helps, right? It
Yeah.
helps, and everything that helps is good. Yeah.
Yeah. I um I read a quote from Chuck Palahniuk one time, and he said that he chooses like whatever the biggest problem is in his life at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He writes a book about it, and then
Mm-hmm.
by the time he's done writing the book, the problem is no longer a problem anymore. And I feel like, that's what I did for a while as well.
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to work from like the opposite end now, and like not the problem, but like what I want, and writing
Mm-hmm.
about that. But
Mm-hmm.
I took that philosophy for quite a while, and I was, yeah, just writing about really diving deep into the problems that I was experiencing. And I guess maybe that's a somewhat easy, like a somewhat easily understandable explanation of that whole process, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it encapsulates it well. Like especially if it worked for him, then for him the proof is in the pudding, right? Like you couldn't tell the man otherwise because he's had the experience with it. So uh, and that's what it really comes down to, right? It's uh, we can talk about it, but at the end of the day, this is a process that it only works if you do it, and to do it, you have to pick up the pen, so to speak, whether it's writing or maybe it's pick up the paintbrush or
Yeah.
whatever the medium is, right? But
Yeah.
you got to do it. Yeah.
Speaking of mediums, like we're both huge hip hop fans, and we've both been hip hop artists for quite a while. And that's something that kind of struck me early on. I didn't get into hip hop too much until my 20s, early 20s, but that was something that kind of struck me, as I felt that hip hop was in a way societal and cultural shadow work in terms of oppressed people and repressed people, and also the content that was coming was like often sexuality and violence and stuff that is repressed in our like general societal consciousness. is that something that you've ever considered or thought about?
Of
Yeah.
course, and I think it's very evident, right? Like it's just like you said, everything you said. Because to get back to that concept, it's like there's so much more going on, right? Like in all of us. So whatever doesn't have that channel of expression, it needs it. So that's what you see, and especially in a society like where people are going through things like various forms of oppression, like naturally that's going to come up because if you're oppressed, that means you can't necessarily always speak about it the way that you want, right? So yeah, it's like there's the two sides to every coin. It's like even within every person, often what you find is like a person's greatest traits are responsible for their worst traits, right? Like if a person has like this amazing drive and ambition that everyone will kind of look up to and admire to, that same drive and ambition may be the reason that he's, I don't know, a bit of an asshole or super stubborn, or you know he's so ambitious that he doesn't have time for other things, so other parts of his life like struggle because he's focused there. You know what I mean? Like there's a polar side to everything, and it'll all come out. It'll all come out, and with socially, naturally, if you have an ability to express yourself in one way and there's something you can't express, then that's, or like if there's something pent up in you, that's where it's going to come out. So uh, I see it as it's a very natural, I think it's a very natural process and reaction. It's like it's almost elementary. Like it has to be this way. Like uh-huh. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. And it can be a negative and a positive thing, right? So sometimes um, like negative emotions overwhelm and become so strong and mishandled that it comes out so harsh, but at the same time, if like for that person, of like expressing it like that is what it takes to make it so that those it stops it from becoming a literal thing in terms of how that person's behaving. It's not literally their behavior, it's just something that they said, and that like relieves the pressure, you know. Uh, like a classic example would be like the whole like Eminem in his heyday with his like
Mm,
destructive raps, right?
yeah.
And it's like I get where like an adult crowd at the time would have been like, this is really negative because
Yeah.
it's coming across like that. What he's saying is sounding very destructive, and it's like dark and dirty language, all of that, right? But for him,
Mm,
it was probably a very healing thing to just get it off of himself like that and then
yeah.
continue on, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I like that it's not always pretty and it's not always neat, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's probably better than it just continuing to bottle up, right?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then sometimes it's like super positive where like there's literally like things happening in society that are wrong,
Yeah.
and then you have artists channeling the opposite of that and speaking out on that, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
to be the light to the darkness, so to speak,
Yeah. Wow.
so
Yeah.
but sometimes you gotta get the darkness out so you can live the light,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Oh, I never thought about that in the sense of bringing when yeah, when you're speaking positively on
Mhm.
something that's being repressed, that you're bringing light to darkness. That's I really like that.
Mhm.
Thanks for saying that.
Mhm. 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 That's
Um
good thought. Mhm.
so you've also told me that symbolism is a big part of your creativity. And I was wondering if is there any framework or lineage of symbols that you work with, like a heritage sort of thing, or anything like that?
Um, this is a whole school of thought.
Yeah,
At least for me personally, like it's a very geeky subject that I
yeah,
love. And again, I'm no academic. This is just
cool.
like some guy on his own musings and wanderings,
Yeah,
right? But again, two academics that I would relate this back to. One would be Joseph Campbell, who's like renowned for studying mythology, and he kind of he wrote like an anthology of like the history of mythology. Excuse me. And he would like go as far back as he could into history and find the myths. Excuse me. And the characters within them, and then trace the evolution culturally with the myth. So he would follow time and go from culture to culture, and like then he would follow the parallels of all these mythologies and how they kind of evolved based on the culture that was taking them in. Because based on that culture, they would maybe put their like spin on this myth, right? To bring it more to like their contemporary level. Um, so that was his work, right? And like that was like his life work, and it was like the most amazing thing. Like, and I've only dabbled in studying and like reading some of his work, and it's mind blowing and like pretty heavy, you know. Uh, and I love that perspective. And again, to go to Jung again, Jung was all about like the archetypes internally, right? Uh, but then I also like when I was really young, especially, I got into like the esoteric, right, and like occult symbolism and stuff. Like that's pretty prevalent. So like Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall and folks like that, and then just breaking down like looking at art and like just being a geek and always looking at it, studying various artists and how these concepts work and like literature to paintings and just taking in the art that I enjoy, you know, from novelists and visual artists, whatever it is. And even film, like film's a great study in symbolism too. Like depending on certain artists, like David Lynch is like so heady and mind blowing with the way he uses film, like symbolism in film, right? Where it's like it's almost tough to follow what he's doing, but he's so like another level with his symbols uh, and basically I look at everything is story, like the whole like humanity, everything is in story, right? That's how we communicate. Everything to me comes down to story, and story it consists of a literary aspect and a visual aspect. Like if I tell you a story, you'll create images, and if I show you an image, you'll create stories to accompany it and how you interpret it, right? So visuals and stories like words, literature, whatever, they go hand in hand to create stories, and stories are what we do, right? And and yeah, so symbols are, it's like you said, they help tell a story in a more contained way, because once you start telling stories, you're looking at telling stories in different ways and in ways to fit different mediums, because uh, it's like there's better ways to tell stories given the format you're working with and stuff, right? Like a very a very straightforward and like linear narrative is not always the best way to actually convey a story, though it's like the classic and most like simple and uh it's the basic framework is like a very linear narrative. Joe started here, Joe ended there, and everything in between, I'll take you through it chronologically, right? But but this is where symbol comes in, and You can tell stories uh, with more layering and in more subtle ways. You know, you can tell stories within stories. You can reinforce ideas. You can really bring so much more dimension to what you're doing with the use of symbols, right? Because things can get much more uh, complex and codependent. Because when you start building things, like for me, it always comes back to like a bit of a puzzle, right? Uh, and how do you just enhance the work by having the right details and um, yeah, all of this like right and yeah, there's definitely archetypal images like we all know them, like a cross. Like if you throw a cross in the mix, people will know what you're doing. You know, that's just like that image has been burned in our consciousness. You know what I mean? Uh, which, like, again, which is what makes the Jesus story so fascinating. Like, regardless what your take on Christianity or Jesus is, look at that story and how it's been burned into our collective memory, right? Like the in consciousness, it's like this. There's some there's got to be some there's something about it that makes it so profound and like been a story that's carried on for 2000 years or so, right? Like there's been many stories told. Why has this one been told for 2000 years so strongly, right? So uh yeah, like, but again, the Bible would be a great study if you're not gonna take everything it says literally. If you want to look at it a little differently, they're like the in symbolism, right? They're, you know, like the great chapter of Revelations, like what is that saying with, it's, you have to read those chapters, you have to look into things symbolically, right? um yeah, so like the classic symbol of a dragon, right? And the dragon is guarding the treasure, right? uh, So this Campbell, again, he tells this story, and it goes back to the shadow work, like you're saying. For Campbell, Campbell's also the guy who's like, we all know the phrase "the hero's journey," right?
Yeah.
That's Campbell, Joseph Campbell.
Okay.
That's
Wow.
that's who, who really coined that, because
Yeah.
that was his study of mythology, and he's like saying his whole thing was like it's really all about the hero's journey. That's what it is, right?
Wow.
And
Okay.
then the classic interaction in the hero's journey of the dragon guarding the gold
Yeah.
is that dark side of the persona. It's like that negative
Wow.
side of ourselves is that dragon. And he's
Yeah.
guarding the treasure because, like, if we want to get to the treasure of who we are, we have to go and face that monster,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we don't want. No one wants to admit it, but there's a monster in us all, right? And
Yeah.
it's what we battle with. Like, we're somewhat aware of it, but we don't want to necessarily admit how how big that monster is and can be. But that doesn't mean that we have to be monsters by any means. But
Yeah.
the ironic thing is you have a better chance of being a monster maybe if you don't embrace it at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
or yeah, because so to speak, you can be devoured by it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's like a classic symbol, and
Yeah.
you trace that to JC Joseph Campbell.
Cool. Is there any have you dove down any rabbit holes of mythology that you've really looked at or studied or anything?
Um, a little bit like I had my own like when I was young, I had a big Jesus fascination, and like from a very different perspective than your typical Christian, so to speak, where I read all the like not all the, but I read a bunch of different books on uh, various interpretations of like what his life might have been if this was like a real character, and the classic like what are the books called? I think they came out in the late 80s, maybe. It was like the blood of the Holy Grail or something. Uh, excuse me again. But basically these like scholars they went in and they were studying the potential like life of Jesus, and they ended up like interacting with some secret society like the Rosicrucians, and they were like giving them like breadcrumbs of like what to study, and it basically led them down this trail of thinking that Jesus had like escaped. He didn't actually die on the cross. He was like healed in the cave, and then he like escaped to like maybe the south of France or something, or maybe he went off to like the like India or something, and then like his wife Mary went off to the south of France, and so Mary died in the south of France, and there's like somewhere out there by like Rene Chateau, there's the like the tomb of Mary, the wife of Jesus, and his child like grew up there, so there's like a bloodline from Jesus in France, right? And so there's these different things, like, and I went into all that, and I got really into that, and that kind of got me into the occult a little bit as well, right? Because it seemed to kind of always be hovering around the topic, and they had their own sets of symbols, and then I met this man. I have a funny story. When I first moved to Vancouver, I would go to the art gallery every now and then, especially like when I first got here. I think it was like my first year here. There was like a pretty like extraordinary display for a while. They had a bunch of classics like of impressionists. They had like some Van Gogh and some Monets. Like there was like some big heavy hit names, right? So I was going a lot to like check these paintings out, and I met this guy, really eccentric character, like a really intense personality too, and I don't know how he ended up talking to me, but he was talking to me about the art, and like he was really like he would like key in and like try to like show me images within the image, and like sometimes I would see it, sometimes I wouldn't, you know. And he had this whole theory about language too. Like I said, he was just a really intense character, and he would just like he would just go off, like he would
Yeah.
get like hot, right?
Yeah.
And he would just be going off, and he would talk about language, and he would talk about words and letters, and his whole, I think like the crux of his theory was letters having meaning, and that like every letter has its own meaning, and that's how like you can break words down, but it's not just the letters that have the meaning, it's like the words themselves. It's more about how the words come out phonetically, more so than um, yeah, I don't know his philosophy. He was intense, right? But it was, as much as I never really grasped the entirety of the concept that he would like espouse, like it was always fascinating food for thought, and it really like made me think about language. And it again, as much as he broke it down into letters and like and phonetic like syllables, almost like in terms of breaking words down, he'd also like break images down into symbols again, right? And what they mean. And I was so young, I was just like absorbing, and I didn't know what was going on, but I was like, I'd see him around like a few times, and
Wow.
he'd really go off on me, and I try to take it in, and
Yeah.
it was a concept that stuck with me forever, and it always will.
Mm.
And I even remember one time I went to actually went to like a Buddhist little monastery in Salem, Oregon, and I went there for a week, and it was like a silent retreat. And the only time we really spoke to people was the first night when we arrived, because then we went to bed, woke up, and it was silence until, and then the last day when we broke, had a meal, and parted ways or whatever, right? Uh, but on that first night, there was like an English professor there, and I was talking to him really briefly, and I like threw this philosophy at him of like, do like letters have meaning, and like how do you break this down, right? And I was just telling him like the little bit I absorbed, however I could communicate it, And he didn't deny it, right? He just kind of looked at me like he was a little intrigued by it, and he was like, "There's something there," you know.
Ah,
He didn't shoot it
wow.
down, so like that just like set me to off even more, like,
Yeah.
what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Ah,
yeah. So I don't know. It was really weird. He was like, um, yeah. I don't even want to get into it because if I start talking about it, I'll probably just sound really silly, and I wouldn't know how to share his idea properly. But it definitely reinforced my excitement and intrigue in symbols because it even like it turned words into like even symbols to some extent, right? So yeah, like you're always looking for interplay between words and language, and also in terms of visuals and symbolic interplay of like when you can connect things, right? But yeah, basic like symbols that are like super frequent is like for men like a flower, or even for women like, but like a flower could be the object of your affection, so to speak. You know what I mean? So flowers, you can use them in, like specifically like a rose, right, is known for love. Uh, a sunflower is typically more associated with like youthful, like excitement, naivete almost. You know what I mean? Like, um, yeah. Um, so you can dive in and start like if you can take the Campbell route where he really break things down. You can follow the lineage and or you can just dive into from anywhere, like pick a symbol and research it, like pick something and find out, you know what I mean? Like animals, like all animals can mean different things, you know what I mean? And some of it's subjective too, like you can create your own symbols depending on personal meaning, right? Like things that embody meanings for you, right? So it doesn't always have to, you don't always have to look and try to fit into a universal thing, but for me, it's just fascinating. So I like to study it and
yeah.
have a grasp like that because I feel like, um, again, and this is like another idea that this character,
Yeah.
uh, I knew him as David R. And
Yeah.
it's funny. I know for a fact that Reflections from the
Okay.
hip hop scene, he's familiar
Yeah.
with David R. as well.
Oh, cool.
So he
Cool.
would know about him and this philosophy
Yeah.
uh, somewhat as well. And what was I saying? I was about to say something for
Oh,
so what was I saying? Jeez.
was it about diving into? I feel like that was a bit before diving into symbols yourself. Hmm.
Yeah, you can create them your own. What was I gonna say? Jesus, why is my mind slipping me?
Um,
Uh, jeez.
hmm.
I can't remember where I was going with that.
Damn. If you want to take a couple seconds to jog your memory, I can always edit this part out if you like, or we can just move on if you want.
Okay. Jeez, I know I was going somewhere with it though,
Yeah. Yeah. I felt like you were too.
but then I got distracted and I wanted to point out that Reflections knew David R. because I thought that was a cool tidbit to throw in. Um, David R. talking about symbols. Uh, I don't know if this was exactly it, but he was talking about like letters have meaning, so numbers have meaning, uh, colors have meaning. Um, you know, he would really break things down. So there's like archetypes to it. So you could even look at like more abstract images or when people paint certain things, right? If you have like a certain understanding of these basic uh, like archetypal principles within all of these, numbers, colors, um, animals, whatever, then you can kind of look at someone's work if they're incorporating these things, and maybe have somewhat of an understanding of like what they're trying to say by using all of that, right? And like I remember when I was a young buck, and I was like really like excited about these ideas. Like I would try to like flex this knowledge. Like sometimes like look at someone's like painting and
Yeah.
look at the colors and whatnot and what they might
Yeah.
mean, and then like, so were you feeling this way? And like sometimes I'd actually like kind of be like a
Yeah.
little onto something with what people were working on, and I don't
Yeah.
know. It's a funny
Yeah.
little take. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's just breaking things down, and um, because, and this might be a little too fantastic of an idea for some
Hmm.
people, but it's like if if there's archetypal meanings to these things in terms of expression and what they mean coming from like a deeper like unconscious place, you can start looking at breaking like artwork down almost like analyzing a dream in a sense. You're almost getting into like that realm of things, you know what I mean? Because that's what a dream will do too, is like a dream is your unconscious communicating with you, right? And how does it communicate with you? By through symbols like that speak to your mind, right? And they'll take those symbols and play them out in a story, right? Because this is how you tell now like a larger story. You take you take characters and you embody them with an archetype, and then you tell a story around them with these other archetypes. So you tell one story on one level about this action playing out, whatever it is, this drama, and then you're telling a deeper story because all these characters and things that happen are really just symbols at play, right? So when you get into a creative state like that, it's like you're not it's you're not even necessarily in charge of what is going to happen. You take your symbols and the symbols tell the story, right? So you empower something with this weight of being, this is actually this, right? So if this is like, and I'm going on this is going to happen with this, and that's how it influences the story. Like the symbol
Yeah.
will tell you what's going to happen in the story,
Yeah.
right? Once you put it in its place and kind of you set the parameters with whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you kind of choose your symbols and how they're going to play out, and then it happens, and then you have your, right. uh,
Yes.
I know this is a little abstract, so some people
No,
might think what I'm
no,
saying
dude.
is very vague, and I get it.
Yeah.
uh, but for me it's like, maybe I can give an example through something I've done. um, or yeah, like, so I'm working on a video project right now. I like to do, I've directed 2 videos right now, and I'm working on a third one that I've been putting together for a project with Monroe. So it'll be a video for me and Ree, and we're gonna do the video with Jordan Humphreys. So those are the 2 guys that I've been building on this with, and it's the same thing. So what's uh you pick a symbol like hmm, we're using, okay, technology. We're going to use like certain like technologies and an evolution of, so we'll have products like that. uh but then, okay, if we look at 2 characters, you can look at 2 guys, and if we're kind of like side by side, we're a duo. You could, if you wanted, look at us and say we embody like the brain, 2 halves of the brain, right? And you'll see us to embody that kind of sitting side by side a lot, to be left and right, right? So if Ryan's left and I'm right, then oh, sorry, I always get this confused. I can't remember which side is which. But one side is the creative sort of
Yeah.
side, and one side is the like the very
Structure.
logical, structured side, right? So if, for example, I'm the structured side, Ree is the creative side, if that's how we divvy it up, then this is how the symbol does the work for you. Just and it's a really basic example, but if we split ourselves up to be symbolic like that, then now whenever we sit with each like beside each other, if Ree is the creative side of the brain, then he has to be sitting on the left. I
Yeah.
might be getting this wrong. Maybe it's the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
for the viewers or listeners, sorry if I'm getting it wrong. But you know what I'm saying? Like that's where the symbol does the work, where he has to sit on that side because that's the symbol doing the work, right? And he'll have to act as fitting to the creative personality, right? So maybe he'll be dressed in all sorts of colors, and maybe I'll show up dressed in like black and white because I see things in black and white. So you see how the symbol is making the choice for me rather than me being like, oh, how should I dress? No, no, like the symbol dictates that. You know what I mean? So that's a very shallow and like basic example of that. But then you play out an entire story of this happening, right? So as the story unfolds, you're not like trying to be like, how should I do this? No, you just look at the symbol and how does the symbol react? Like, you know, so I'm really elementary with this, so this is a very like crude, unrefined breakdown of this whole process. But hopefully, it makes sense to people what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it's all new to me, and it's making sense, and is I think that's really a really interesting concept, man. Really cool.
mhm,
Really
mhm,
cool.
mhm. Yeah, just different ways to look at things. I'm just one guy indulging himself with what really interests me and where I'm drawn to artistically, and I'm a bit of a geek with it. This is how I kind of look at things and have processed things over the years. So this is just my point of view on creating, and I love hearing other people's point of views as well. And yeah, but yeah, in terms of working with the unconscious and symbols, this is uh, lots of this is part of my process. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you ever had any really profound or rewarding experiences through doing this kind of work?
Um, for sure, for sure. I don't know how profound or anything, but like on a very personal level, I remember one time I was kind of like going through some stuff, and it was just a few years ago, and I kind of had like a block artistically. I went through a period where I wasn't really creating much, if at all. Excuse me again. Jeez, I keep something's going on with me today. Oh my god. Uh, but yeah, so I was kind of like in this, it's like a stalemate personally, creatively, and and then I wrote this song, and I won't like get into details about what song it is or whatever. But when I wrote the song, it was like a dark, very personal song. And after I wrote the song, the floodgates opened. So that was like a super interesting experience where I really saw it as like, um, again, like what I was going through. I was kind of conscious of going through it, but I wasn't maybe I wasn't fully facing it head on or just didn't know how to process it. And it took a while to write the song. And it was just like I reflect on it now, and it seems pretty clear that it was a very large issue within me, and the only way I could really process it for some reason was to like write this song. And it's like until I wrote the song, I couldn't write anything else. Like it was really like congesting my creative channels. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting experience because I reflect on it and you almost see the how how profound the experience could be in terms of uh, so much just again happening within us at an unconscious level, and how much space within us it takes up, and how important it is to process it so as to be able to move on and get to the next stage of living and going at things, right? So um, it was just one song, but it was like it was like a it was a big thing that I had to push out, and it took time to get out. And it's like I just couldn't do anything creatively till it was out. And so for me, that was very profound in just reflecting on the experience and having this like insight in myself on how like my whole system could work, right? Yeah, so it really took my head for a spin on top of just being a means of processing what I was going through and getting past it as well. So it was like it's profound on two levels for myself, you know, the actual process and the reflection. Yeah, because it gave me insight a little more into this whole process we're talking about. You know what I mean? I understand this whole thing that we've talked about that much more because of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then artistically, it's just rewarding when you can put something together, right? Like little artistic accomplishments when, um, like I said, you plant these seeds in terms of how you want to kind of do things, right? And sometimes they take time to grow. You know, it could take years for yourself to evolve as an artist to the place where you can make these things happen the way you want them to, right? And had envisioned. Uh, so when you have a moment of really like creating something that kind of hits for you on that level that you were envisioning back when, you know, those can be fulfilling moments, you know. And uh, for myself, I remember directing my first music video, the committee music video. That was like, that was a very fulfilling uh, artistic moment. Uh, yeah, because for me, again, that video is built on symbolism, you know. For me, like I see, I know I have my little story that I'm telling in that video, and it's not a overly narrative. Like there's, so I don't know if many people really can catch my little story, but I know I conveyed it the way I want to, and I know it's there to be read. And for me, it's just like that's all you can do, you know. And I'm very happy with that. Obviously, visually, I don't make the visuals like, and I had the fortune of working with very talented videographers and filmmaker like Leia and Michael who helped out on that, and you know like Jordan for these other videos as well. So I'm fortunate to be able to work with people who help bring these ideas to life, right? But that was one of my more fulfilling artistic ventures. I was very happy with that.
The last question I just want to ask is, yeah, what impact do you want to leave in the world with your creations, do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. That's um, yeah. Um, really, like especially where I'm at now, I guess like this maybe is an answer that could change. Like if you ask me this question next month, next year, maybe it'd be different. Right now, the way I'm looking at my art and what I've been doing recently is I would like to think I'm giving a very honest perspective on what it's like to deal with just like personal issues uh, from yeah, like just trying to be really raw in just like displaying raw humanity in a sense of like trying not to judge myself even in terms of how I judge things if that makes any sense, and just you know like giving a raw display of where I'm at, good and bad, you know. I always like to think that like if you listen to my music you're not gonna like have like a very like sometimes you listen to people's music and they sound like such like superheroes almost, you know, like, oh, this person just kills it at everything they do. They're just like amazing, like crushes it with women, he crushes it with money, just everything is just like being the best in every way. You know what I mean? Whereas with me, you're like gonna get an honest look at a flawed human going through his shit. And but like striving to be better, you know, like not trying to indulge in anything negative, right? Like trying to walk the line, but to really not hide my flaws, but expose them just as much as my positive traits, right? And yeah, because you're always hoping to inspire, you know, like with art, uh, I don't subscribe that art always has to be conventionally beautiful. Like we all know, you can make a sad piece that's beautiful. You can make like these sad is an easier one because we can all sympathize with sorrow, right? So you know you can express sorrow and make it beautiful, but even worse qualities, you know what I mean? Uh, but if it's all so human, so there has to be beauty in it because we're all just humans. Like I really believe that uh, evil is a very rare thing. I'm not saying it's like not out there, but for like a very like an actual evil person with like evil intent of just like wanting to harm and destroy, I think that's a very very rare thing. And majority of it is just like ignorance. People are just lost, you know what I mean? And that doesn't justify people's ignorance in terms of like projecting that onto the world and having like certain ways of behaving that are harmful, whatever. That's no justification for it, but nonetheless, it's like this is where really great people sometimes can be very forgiving and understanding because again, I'm such a Jungian geek, but Jung's whole thing was like the reason people could open up to him and go see him and confide in him and really like expose and share their darkest sides to him was because he said he genuinely did not judge them because he had seen into the darkness in his own soul. He had seen the potentiality in him for all of this. So he had a very genuine, non-judgmental way about him that made people really comfortable and open, right? Uh, so I'm not I'm not young, but I try to subscribe to that, and I do become judgmental. So don't let me like mislead people.
Yeah.
But I I try to take that and try to apply it at least somehow in looking at that because people, even like some of the worst of us, are just ignorant and lost and hurt in a sense, maybe, you know what I mean? And but people really like people are out to protect and themselves and survive, and even when there's a lack of intellect and knowledge, like that comes across in a really skewed way because they have these like weird beliefs maybe that were instilled in them culturally through like the environment they grew up in, you know what I mean? And again, it doesn't justify, but to try to understand people from that level. And I guess I say that because I try to extend that same I try to like I judge myself more than I judge anyone else, you know, and but I try to extend that same understanding to myself when I create, and in hopes of doing that, uh I don't know, hopefully inspire that in others by just being that way with myself. And yeah, I don't know. But that's when I'm working these days, a lot of that's what's coming up, and it's just yeah, just trying to process things still and just put it out there. And you know, like I said, with me, I think if you look at my stuff, you get the worst and the best of me. I think it's all there. I think it's all there in the work, you know. And I that's hopefully hopefully you understand a little bit, you know, and don't judge me too much. But
That's a great answer, man. I really like that. I really like that.
Mhm.
I can see that in your work for sure. For sure. Definitely expose. expose a lot of yourself in your work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of your work, where can people like check out your music and follow you on Instagram and whatnot, man?
Yeah, cheers. So I really like my little YouTube page. There's not too many videos up on it, but I really like if people would want to go to my YouTube and subscribe to that, Jakub Evolved. Uh, I've got more videos coming, hopefully over the winter. We've got a few things happening, so should have a couple more videos going up. On Instagram, it's Jakub is what, because I call myself Jakub Evolved, but I think it's a little funny because I'm more evolving. I always say that. That's the joke. Like it should be Jakub Evolving, but it just doesn't have the ring to it, like Jakub Evolved, you know. So it's a little misleading because the process isn't done, you know. Uh, so I joke on Instagram, it's Jakub is what. Yeah, and then you search me Jakub Evolved, but it's Jacob with a Ku, not a Co. So Jakub. Evolved is spelled like evolved, and yeah, you can find me right now in going solo. Like I have a few songs up on my like Spotify and Apple and all that, but there's more coming. There's only a few songs up at the moment. Then the videos on YouTube will be coming as well. So yeah, Instagram, YouTube, and then the streaming services.
Cool, man.
That's where I would push people.
Cool. Cool. Well,
Sorry, I'm
thanks.
so long-winded with everything.
No, dude, not at all. That's the point of this is I want to
Yeah.
dive deep with people, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of really good stuff in what we just talked about. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you being open and like and honest and talk and taking the time as well, man. I really appreciate it. It was really cool.
Yeah. Thanks again, man. It was a very fun conversation. And one last emphasis on the disclaimer: I'm not an academic. I'm just a guy that did my own studies based on my
Yeah.
own interests and my own experience in creating and applying the things I've used. So
Yeah.
if you go to a university, they might teach you that everything I said is wrong, and if so, forgive me. But
Yeah.
this is all my experience from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Cool,
thanks for
man.
having me, man. It was such a
Dude.
pleasure.
Dude, so sweet. So sweet. Yeah, really, really appreciate it, man.
Man, it was fun. Thank you so much.
So I think my main takeaways from this episode, something that really, really struck a chord with me and something that's been a misunderstanding, I would say for me, is that shadow work is not necessarily dark emotions or dark personality traits. It's all of your unconscious. So that was kind of paradigm shifting for me in terms of how I'm going to look at that from now on. Another thing that he talked about, and I would say similar to Jennifer Jacobs, is he spoke about letting go and allowing your unconscious to do the work. And I know I've had moments in creativity where I write something down and then 2 months later I look at that line and I'm like, oh, that's what I was saying, and it makes so much sense as to where I'm at, and just fits in so well with the concept of what I was trying to do. So I think letting go and trusting your unconscious to handle the work sometimes can be so huge. So I think that's a big takeaway. And also will say I have these podcasts, I have vlogs on YouTube, and I'm also kicking off a contest on Instagram for a free 3-track EP mix and master by Museworks Audio. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're interested in working with me, then enter the contest and let's get down to business. Other than that, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Take care.